Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Catherine Straw, and I am president of the Student Board for the Center for Arts Leadership. I'm thrilled to have been selected to join this passionate group of students. Along with the summit, the Center for Arts Leadership is laying the foundation for success for students through leadership opportunities, mentorship, and research opportunities. We have a diverse group of graduate and undergraduate students representing writers, theater, and visual artists, and we even have an engineering major. In addition to pursuing my MBA, I'm a member of the advancement team here at the university. Previously, I spent 10 years in development with two major arts organizations in Atlanta, the Alliance Theater and the Atlanta Botanical Garden, which were both recognized for outstanding leadership by the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta's Managing for Arts Leadership Award. So like you, I have firsthand knowledge of the importance of strong leadership to propel the arts forward. I have the pleasure to introduce to you today the moderator for our next conversation on audience engagement. My colleague, Rebecca Gentry, Executive Director of Campaign Strategic Initiatives. Her work in the arts stems back to Washington's historic Mount Vernon Estate and Gardens and the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the National Young Arts Foundation in Miami.
Can everyone hear us? Are we on? Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Let me begin by saying how delighted I am to see so many people visiting the University of Houston today, and we're all engaged on a gorgeous day in the arts, so we know we're passionate if we're inside on this beautiful day. I am new to Houston. I wanted to start by saying that I've only lived here a matter of months, so I'm not just new to the University of Houston, but I'm new to the city of Houston, and as a person who's spent her career in the arts and as a volunteer in the arts, I am very excited to be dipping my foot in fast, and so I'm so excited to get to know so many of you and what drives your passions in this room, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion. As you know, we're here to talk about the piece of stewardship and audience and community and how they come together, and we're going to talk about, how do we balance out? Are we looking for numbers? Are we looking for engagement? And what do those things mean? How do we think strategically, and how do we meet all audience needs? My colleagues up here are going to tell us some stories, and I want to share with you, I was really struck by something I read on Glenn's webpage today, which is a wonderful quote that says, "Telling stories that inspire action," and so many people up here are doing that. So we are going to allow everyone to introduce themselves first, and I've asked all of them after they introduce themselves to share with us what surprises them most about the audiences of the arts in Houston. So welcome, and Glenn, why don't you kick it off?
Great. My name is Glenn Taylor. I'm very happy to be here. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the Houston Symphony. I've worked at the Symphony in marketing for the last 10 years, and have a real passion for the arts. I studied music in college. I'm a jazz pianist, and then layered on top of that a music industry studies degree, and always had a passion for connected to the community, giving back, being of service, and relating to the nonprofit sector. I also really love the topic of leadership. I do some coaching and consulting and training with organizations around leadership development, team building, and culture, and bring those skills to the table in leading a team at the Symphony, as well as my work outside of the orchestra. In terms of what surprises me about arts audiences in Houston, it's we know that our audiences are excited and passionate about the art, but it never fails to surprise me just how passionate sometimes patrons are about their arts experience. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, how fickle audiences can be and how hard it is to put your finger on them and keep them engaged. So I think it's a really tremendous topic and interesting topic to explore today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judith Kernick, and I'm also new to Houston in a matter of months, so we'll have to compare who's newer. It is a real pleasure to be here and to understand that you could actually have this weather in April. Yesterday was my birthday, and I'm used to snow on my birthday from where I come from, so this is a real change for me. I'm not sure it's comfortable, but it's definitely a change. I come back from the orchestra world myself. I came from the League of American Orchestras in New York, which is the national service organization of orchestras, and I have a background as a violinist from the beginning, and then a journalist, and also someone who has spent a lot of time working at an orchestra. I had 2 terms, actually 2 tenures at the Philadelphia Orchestra, and really was interested in the intersection between audience and community. And I think that there's a really important distinction there, and there's an important way of approaching the two that I was very excited to see at HGO, and it's one of the reasons that I came here. But I think that the idea of getting beyond what you do to who you do it with and for is probably one of the most important things that I am passionate about. In terms of surprise, I just am amazed at the fact that we have young people in our audience at HGO. I know that's true in other places. I've been to a couple of different performances so far here, and this diverse city really is more and more represented in the arts community, and I think that is very unusual and very exciting. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Alicia Lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I started, I always say that. People out there have heard me say that 1,000 times. I started the River Oaks Chamber Orchestra 10 years ago. I played the oboe, and I was our ED, and now I'm artistic director and janitor, and principal oboe. And as we all know what it takes to make something happen, you have to be everything to everyone. And I have a whole talk about ROCO, so I'll talk about it later, but I am just so excited to be in this town. The depth and breadth of the arts, we need to climb some mountains and tell people, but I kind of don't want to, because I want to keep it our little secret in some ways. I think the thing that surprises me the most about our audiences, anybody's audiences, is the latent potential for joy that we can unlock with our arts, and that is something that has not been a mission statement, but probably should be for ROCO. Thank you.
I'm Robert Pruitt. I'm a visual artist. I think there might be a little bit of a difference. I don't represent an institution or an organization proper. I kind of work in a number of collaborative groups. I have my own sort of separate sort of traditional arts practice, and then I work in these other organizations that are basically just me and another artist or a group of artists trying to do projects guerrilla style, very little funding. So I'll show some images from some of that stuff later. I think the thing that surprises me about Houston, maybe it's not a surprise, but the thing I kind of like the most is how easy it is to kind of network and meet people and get things done through conversations. And I don't imagine that happens in other places so quickly and easily.
Excellent. And I was wanting to share something that's been in the recent Community Indicator Report. In the executive summary, it begins by saying, here in Houston, we create and celebrate the arts and cultural heritage the same way we do so many other things, with bold strokes, rambunctious energy, and of course, great good humor. And I think you can already see some of that, and I think we're going to see some of it today as we talk about the specifics of our region. So without further ado, we'll start our presentations, and then we'll engage in some questions and some dialogue amongst the panelists.
Great. So just want to share some of my thoughts on this topic of numbers versus engagement. At the Houston Symphony, we're experimenting a lot in the area of engagement. We are not experts by any means, but we are jumping in and experimenting and trying a lot of things. So I'd like to share some things that seem to be resonating with our audiences. But first of all, I do want to point out, I think the whole bucket of transactional activities that relate to getting numbers of audiences, breadth of audiences, are still really important. You've got to do all of the kind of basic blocking and tackling of marketing and communications, and I feel like that has an important role as well, because it kind of gets you that basic set of audience members who are predisposed to experience your art, but it only takes you so far. So I think we're looking at the Houston Symphony in terms of future sustainability. And what will that look like? There are a lot of trends, I think probably as you all know, just affecting arts consumption across the nation. And so we've got to all face those and figure out how we can engage even more people. So First of all, I'll give you the perspective a little bit. For the orchestra industry, the entire country is really grappling with this concept of engagement and what that looks like. There was a recent set of research called the Patron Growth Initiative that really aimed to look at how do we bridge the gap between buyers to be investors and advocates, and what kind of creates that lifetime model between ticket buyers to donors to what we call super patrons, who are those who are investing in many, many ways into your organization. And really what it came down to through that study was back to the basics of relationship building. One of the main takeaways had to do with frequency and tenure, and that getting people to come to your organization more often actually trumps any long-term kind of tenure measurement. So just the more you can get people engaged with your art at any really level of tenure, the more that they will be invested. So another challenge that study brought up was really creating your organization as a patron-centered model, as opposed to, and this may be a little bit controversial, as opposed to art-centered. And what I mean by that is, especially in the orchestra industry, when I think when it began, it was all about if we play it, they will come. And the art, it really always comes first without regard for the audience. And I'm probably talking in broad strokes and in generalities, but in a sense, we are trying to move our organizations even structurally towards more of an audience-centric approach. And so, what does that look like? So essentially, I think it's really critical to be really digging into this topic of engagement with our audiences. And at the Symphony, we're revisiting our mission statement as part of a strategic planning initiative, and have brought in that word engagement and engage, which hadn't been part of our mission statement. So I think that's an interesting sign of the impetus and the energy around it. So I just want to give a few examples of things that we're trying that seem to be catching some momentum. One piece is integrating the art makers with the audience in a more direct way. And I think traditionally this has been reserved more for the development side, for that small group of patrons who we want to bring closer and be more engaged because they have the bigger dollars. Well, I think the entire organization needs to do that. So integrating musicians, who are the art makers in our case, with our audience members, even first-time ticket buyers or first-time subscribers, in terms of personal notes, meet and greets, and working collaboratively with the organization to figure out how we make those things happen. Also, experimenting with concert formats. We've done some things around integrating Q&A sessions into concerts. We are experimenting with a new series featuring our new incoming music director. He'll act as host from the stage and really engage with the audience, play musical examples before a full piece is performed. And those aren't new ideas, but we're trying different combinations and figuring out what really will resonate with audiences to make them part of the experience. Another piece is reflecting the city's diversity, and I think in terms of audience growth, that's a real challenge before us for the fine arts. And one way that we are jumping into this is not trying to come up with the answers ourselves, but we have created some advisory councils. So we have a Hispanic Leadership Council, an African American Leadership Council, an Asian Leadership Council, and we've identified business leaders and influencers in the community to help us learn what will be resonant for you, what can we do to create with you. And a couple of projects have come out of that. We actually are doing a citywide choir, gospel choir initiative with our African American Leadership Council, which will be a whole new concert that we've never done, and we're auditioning members from all over the city to be part of this citywide choir. And so it's an interesting kind of co-creation element, which I think really gets to the essentials of engagement. It's about that two-way conversation and two-way creation with the audience. And the last piece I'll mention is partnerships. We've looked at organizations to create concerts that, again, wouldn't have happened before if we were just thinking inside of our own heads. For example, the Anti-Defamation League wanted to put on a concert and I think this was their gala performance, and really honor certain Houstonians who have been integral in their initiatives. And so we created a concert together and actually ended up featuring Bun B, who's a Houston rapper, which ended up just really blowing up in the social media side, attention for the symphony and for ADL, and changing people's perspectives about what's possible at an orchestra performance. We've also partnered with University of St. Thomas in helping them to raise some money for their new performing arts center. So I think it's really about putting in the time and resources, and we'll probably get to that, but it requires a kind of a different investment and a greater investment, but we are starting to see those things really kind of catch hold for us. Thanks.
Well, as I said earlier, one of the reasons that I came to Houston Grand Opera, and by the way, in the program it says I'm Director of Marketing. That's not quite correct. It's Director of Communications, so there's a bit of a difference. I don't think I would know how to do marketing in the way that people do it today, for sure. Houston Grand Opera was focused on excellence, but also on connecting beyond the stage. And I had read and heard about this groundbreaking initiative called Gioco. This is, the CO stands for Company, Community, and Collaboration. And basically this is an initiative that sprang from the idea that the organization exists to be a cultural resource for the city. And the belief also that art is for everyone, and it's not just to be on a concert hall or in a special occasion situation. The bottom line for Houston Grand Opera was that the NEA estimates that there are about 2% of the public goes to opera. But here, if we're asking for $20 to $23 million a year for opera, we need to reach more people than that. So we started, I should say, this was in 2007, started with a kind of groundbreaking basic assumption, and that we were going to think beyond the stage and really look back at what is the basic definition of opera, and they determined that it was storytelling through words and music. So the goal became to enhance the community by using the craft of opera to tell the stories of those who call Houston home. I don't know if any of you had heard recently about the two operas we just premiered. One was for the Vietnamese community, and it was a true story about a young woman who was working 2 jobs and as a result had to miss school too many times and was jailed for truancy because she was taking care of her family. It was a very powerful story and one that attracted a lot of people's attention. The other one was for the Indian community, the Indian American community. And for both of these, in the last few months, we've given performances at community centers, we've given workshops, we've had talkbacks and community conversations. And they were also promoted in the media of those communities as well as the mainstream media. Those are just 2 examples of the kinds of programs that have evolved from really a lot of different non-main stage activity. And HGOCO programs the majority of what is non-main stage, and that includes teacher workshops, performances, collaborations with kindred organizations, and also the renowned high school voice studio, which is part of HGO. Our belief is that the artistic experience entails observation, participation, and creation. And we try to involve at least 2 of those activities in all of the different programs that we are involved with in HGOCO. So performing in the community obviously is observation. The conversations that we have are very much about participation. And when it comes to creation, HGOCO has done an enormous amount with different communities around different occasions. So there was a piece that had to do with 10 years of after 9/11, people's stories of where they were in Houston, putting those to words, putting those to music. People's stories around the rodeo. We created something called Rodeo Songs. That's a big event in Houston, in case some of you are not from Houston. I just learned all about it. There is no education director at Houston Grand Opera. There is no outreach. Those are not part of our vocabulary or our experience. It's about partnerships and connections. Above all, it's about listening and meeting people where they are. So for the very first project, which was the Refuge, there were interviews with more than 100 members of 7 different communities to capture their stories of coming to Houston. Today, we bring a group called Writers in the Schools into 5th grade classrooms to help the children write poetry about their own lives. And then we bring in University of Houston and Rice composers to help set those songs to music. And out of those 30 songs, there may be 2 that are great, but that's not the point. I would just say that since 2007, Gioco has reached more than 1 million people, and our success is not measured in who's buying tickets. We're measuring excellence in storytelling. We're measuring ways we are enhancing community connections and the changes and observations that we have observed. And I would say, just to wrap up, that Gioco has won national awards, but more importantly, I think it's making a difference in Houston, and I'm very proud to be associated with it. Thank you.
Hi, Alicia again, not a lawyer. I'm really lucky here to not have to talk about change because I started this from scratch. So it's a creation model, which is really exciting. For those of you who don't know, ROCO is a 40-piece professional chamber orchestra. Half of the musicians don't live here. They come from all over. We just have a lot of joy on our stage. We've done 38 concerts this year, and we smile when we play. I don't smile while I play because I play the oboe and it would sound bad, but we've been broadcast nationally over 60 times, and it's a really exciting time because next year is our 10th season. We are speaking all the time about relevance and authentic relationships. I use that word all the time, authentic relationships and experiences. And our audience experiences classical music very differently with ROCO. I love that you talk about relational versus transactional because that's exactly what we talk about, the traditional model of transactions and moving them up the pipeline. Being able to start this from scratch, I took it straight from a pure investor ownership model, which is just a wonderful relationship building thing that happens, much more than buying a ticket or even just much more than a concert. There's a way to interact with our musicians, and we actually make it super current and fun. One of the most important ways we make it current is that we do world premieres continuously. In 9 years, we've done 39 world premiere commissions, and I'm just super proud of that. That includes chamber music, but also for the 40-piece orchestra. We're actually doing one tomorrow night if you want to hear it, 5 o'clock. So we do these world premieres, and what I really feel like is that we're not necromancers, okay? We want multi-generational audiences, and I don't have empirical evidence for this, but I really feel like audiences may not be necessarily aging. I think you get to a certain point in your life where you have time and money, and you're able to spend time with an art form that requires you to be present with it. And so I love the multi-generational audiences. One of the ways we do get that is that we offer a child care music education program during and after our concerts. Our concerts are early at 5, so you can be done at 7 and get on with your evening. The kids get a music education childcare program and come into the concert for 1 piece. Then they stay for pizza and movies until 10, so parents get a date night after the concert. I say we're saving marriages 1 concert at a time. So, yay, now you're laughing. Okay, good, because it's giving me some energy up here. Come on. We do things very differently. Our concert program is not put in order. It's actually in alphabetical order, and that was from the beginning because I couldn't really decide how it should go until the last minute. But now it's more because the conductor or the concertmaster is the MC for the concert, and they call from the stage almost like a jazz show what we play. It's not random. It's just, it feels very in the moment when you're in the concerts. We put timings for pieces. In case you hate it, you know how much longer it is. And nobody laughed at that. Okay, but it's true. We do. And we do a take 5 where the musicians actually clip name tags on and walk into the audience and speak to people. I kind of say we're the Cheers of orchestras. Everybody knows your name, but we know our audience's names. And we keep house lights up so people can read the programs and they can do the little word puzzles we have. I have ADD, it's clear. So, it's clear, and I think it's okay for an audience to still be engaged and be present and still be reading a program that's something about what they're doing. I feel like that audiences, I don't want them to feel stupid, or it says here to want them to feel smart, but you don't want them to walk in and feel dumb. And I guarantee you that 90% of our city doesn't know how to pronounce Mozart. And that's not their job. That's our job to say it's not Mozart, it's Mozart. So we put pronunciation guides for composers' names. And it's okay. I mean, I don't know how to do my taxes. That's why I hire someone. This is our job. It's not an official education program. It's an welcoming, inviting, no barriers program is what we do. I also know that most people don't know that orchestral positions are lifetime tenured jobs. You have to wait for someone to retire or die. But then there'd be an opening. And across the nation, there may be 3 openings for oboe a year. So that's kind of where we go. But then to go into this whole idea of building the patron model, that it becomes an investorship model. Investorship is not a word, but you can adopt a musician in the orchestra. So everybody in the orchestra has been adopted by an individual. But there are a lot of people who can't do that. So I asked this one lady a couple of years ago 5 years ago now, to gather her friends and then gather them together and support a musician. So they're very invested in the organization, and it becomes something like the consortium is what we actually call it. We make it very personal that, again, not only do you know the orchestra's names, but we know your names. And, again, the house lights are up. And it's not about the conductor. We don't have a named conductor. They flow in and out. The orchestra, the 40 are who you know. And one of the ways you can actually know that, I'm getting my phone, is we developed ringtones for individual musicians. So this is my ringtone, and it's our principal cellist, Richard Belcher, who's from New Zealand, playing the Haydn Concerto. So that's my ringtone. And you can, I'm not going to play, mine's weird, but so that's the point, is you can actually own the orchestra and carry it with you. And then when people hear it, you can go, well, let me tell you about Rocco. So it's a really great marketing tool, too. I really feel like we're growing the collective patron, that's what I call it. And it just feels like this kind of overarching swell through the city. My philosophy has started when I was really young, and it's everybody's a friend we haven't met yet. And that's really how Rocco approaches it. Our mission is shaping the future of classical music, and it's shaping the future of classical music through energizing, personalizing, and modernizing the orchestral experience. But it's shaping the future, and the reason that is because I go around the country talking about entrepreneurialism in the arts, and I call that wildcatting in the arts. In case nobody knows what that is, it's an oil and gas term. And I'll tell you what it is later if you want to ask. But we look for connections and explore new opportunities, but we take acceptable risks. I don't like the word acceptable risk, but I had to put it in because my board made me. But I like taking risks, taking levels of risk with ruthless prioritization and determination to grow. And our tagline now is Houston's energy source for classical music. Thank you.
You had one called Yoda.
I did.
Did we hear that one?
No.
Is that not one of the...
Okay, no, here's...
Your phone?
Oh, I thought it was a...
Sorry. That's literally Yoda.
I thought it was just a name. Okay. It's okay. I'm Robert Pruitt. I'm a visual artist and Star Wars fan, so... Yoda. I'm going to... So, like I said before, I have a very traditional arts practice, but I also have a practice where I do a lot of collaborative projects. So I'm going to start with the traditional thing because it leads me to why I do these other things. I create two-dimensional pieces of artwork. They're drawings of friends of mine, charcoal, whatever, things like this. And I show them in museums, galleries, and art spaces. And the thing that happens in terms of audience with that is that I'm able to just make the work, show it in a museum, and plug into whatever audience that space has been able to cultivate. And so I'm not forced to think about audience in that way or engagement. It's already kind of a set-up thing. But one of the things I realized pretty quickly was that those audiences that have been cultivated and that are trained to visit museums, galleries, and art spaces are not necessarily the audiences that I'm totally interested in engaging with. It's sort of a limited a limited audience. So if I wanted a more diverse, wide-ranging, sort of, class-based audience, I was going to have to figure out other strategies. And so that led me to sort of participating in these collaborative projects. So this is a photograph of myself and my girlfriend, Autumn Knight. She's in the audience in the back. We started a collaborative called MF Problem. And so the MF stands for what you think it stands for, and it also it can be interchangeable for other terms. But we do 1 or 2 projects a year, and they all sort of follow the same form. So far, they've followed the same form of, figuring out how to gather people together to kind of hang out and have a party, but with a sort of a conceptual kind of groundwork or framework around it. So I think one of the first things we did, and that kind of maybe started us on this path, was we used to rent an apartment from Project Row Houses. I know Linda Shearer, the director, is here, but and Project Row Houses is a really interesting space, and so it's right in a community that kind of engages the community. One of the things that happens is that where those apartments were, there was this gas station, the mobile gas station, very problematic. You can go there and get your chips and soda and that kind of thing, but at night, it really transformed into like a place of like all kinds of illicit activities. And so as people who lived around there, this residence council, we were sort of tasked with sort of trying to figure out what to do about this place. And so that ranged from, calling the police, engaging with the owner, all these sort of typical things, which really had no effect. And so as artists, we tried to do this thing where we would supplant the activity that happened there at that time of night with a different type of activity. So we organized these parties, basically. People came out, played dominoes. We hired a DJ, gave away food to, some of the drug addicts that would normally be hanging out there doing whatever they do at night. Now they're eating hot dogs and hanging out. So, and of course, this isn't like a really sustainable kind of model, but for the times that it happened, we did about 5 or 6 of these, I think. We did it, over the course of 2 years, I think. It really did, I think, have an effect on that corner for that moment. And in terms of audience, it really engaged a different type of audience. Number one, people who live in the neighborhood and know that space can kind of see that, something else is possible to happen there, right? And then also the people who are doing those illicit activities obviously see it because they stay away until we're gone. So it's a different way to kind of think about, at least for me, like how we think about audiences. So we've done a couple of different projects similar to this, but I'm not going to go into all of those. I'm going to switch to another project I'm a part of. This is myself, a friend of mine, Makina Tapscott, also like a cousin. And that's George Smith, who's an artist, and we do this thing called Houston Open Studio Tours, where we take collectors into the studios of local artists in Third Ward and, a little bit beyond. But, in my practice, in my solo practice, I'm able to like show and work and sell and that kind of thing. But I recognize also pretty quickly that the representation of black artists in Houston in the gallery scenes is really, really limited. There's not a lot of spaces where I show at a gallery that shows about maybe 5 or 6, and that's a really rare thing for galleries in Houston. So there's not a lot of commercial viability for black artists working in Houston. And so we are trying to maybe create that. I really have no skill at this. I'm trying to figure it out as I go. But so one of the things we're trying to figure out is how to create new collectors. And so that becomes like our audience. Like, how do we convince people to participate in this form of collecting artwork? And so we try to have these intimate settings where we bring people, they meet the artists. I think in the earlier panel, someone was talking about the non-artists getting to see how things are made. And so that's one of the things we want to happen, is to invite the collectors into the studio and talk to the artists themselves and develop a relationship. And so one thing that I hope can happen is that artist, even beyond Houston Open Studio Tours, connects with those collectors on a long-term basis, outside of us. So hopefully they buy something and there's a little bit of profit split between us and the artist, but then beyond that they have this longer relationship. And so we've been doing that about 1.5 years, and it's really difficult, I find, to build collectors. This is Lauren Kelly. That was Rabea Bain. This is Lauren Kelly. But the okay, I have to wrap up, so I'll be quick. The collaborative I've been a part of the longest is Odabinga Jones and Associates. It's 5 of us. It's one person who's fictional, who is Odabinga Jones, and then 4 guys, myself, and then Jamal Cyrus in the middle, and Kenya Evans on the far end, and Jabari Anderson's not pictured. This is in our most recent project at Project Row Houses, in an installation we just completed. But we tend to have already built in an audience for our collaborative. There are people who sort of follow what we do and come to our openings. And so I think one of the ways we kind of think about things is what are we bringing to our audience? So like our audience in some ways is already not set because we still want more people to participate. But so we do a lot of different like educational things. We turn museums into classrooms. We turn museums into gymnasiums and turn those gymnasiums into movie theaters and like invite our audience to these places. So it's for us, we use institutions as a way to get funding to do things. This is at the Menil Collection where we turn the gallery into a classroom. This is one of our lecturers. This is the late Amir Baraka. Through the museum's funding, we were able to bring him down and give a lecture. The lecture was based on the combined archives of the Menil Collection and Oda Binga-Jones and Associates. And so he sort of taught a class using that installation as a spark. This is the gymnasium. I forgot to put these in here. But one of the most recent things we've done that really kind of made me rethink audience was this mural at Lawndale Arts Center. So we're doing a larger project called the People's Plate, and it's funded by Creative Capital. And in association with that, it's all about food justice and access to food. There's a mural program that happens at Lawndale that has a large sort of viewership. Like each day, I think something like 20,000 people drive by. It's on Main just after this 59 exit, so it gets a lot of people passing by. So we're like, hey, that's a great location to have an image that kind of talks about what we're doing. But in the creation of this mural, beyond that sort of drive-by traffic, one thing that happened was that there's a whole community of people who live around that space who stopped us every day to talk about the mural, to ask questions. And I think it's, again, like seeing how the thing happened. And so we all met in undergrad at Texas Southern University just down the road, which had a very like vibrant mural program in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and started by artist John Biggers, who talked about murals as a way to kind of operate within your community, which wasn't a thing I had ever really, really considered. Like I did my time in the mural program to kind of, satisfy that requirement, but I wasn't interested in making murals. But I kind of, working on it, I kind of realized like, oh, this is what he was talking about. Like the people come out to see what you're doing. And so it really changed how I thought about who my audience could be and how we could engage with them, like by actually performing a fairly traditional art form out in public for people to kind of see and interact with. So I think that's my time.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. So we're talking a lot about storytelling, and we're talking a lot about meeting people where they are. So I would like to pose to the panel, how have you been impacted by what I would call the attention span issue of our audiences? Meaning we're having to learn to storytell in short numbers of characters, case in point, Twitter feeds, and people that are telling stories minute by minute with their thumbs. What have you had to learn? What have you had to rethink, not just yourselves, but the culture of your colleagues and how you engage and build engagement?
Well, I'll jump in. I think it not only obviously affects our marketing and communication strategy with the splintering of communication formats and having to be more brief and interruptive to get people's attention. But we've had to ask hard questions about what's the right length of a performance to really keep an audience engaged. Typically, orchestra performances run about 2 hours with an intermission. And so part of our experimentation around concert formats is really looking at shorter concerts. Actually, the New World Symphony in Miami, they're doing a lot of innovative things. They've experimented with 30-minute concerts, and they have, I believe, 3 or 4 of them in one evening. And their hall is really, they have a new hall that's really vibrant, and they can throw like a big projection of what's happening in the concert hall on the outside of the building. And they actually try to attract people in from the street, people that are walking by, passersby who are in the area to come experience a quick concert for like $2.
It's $2.50, and it's 30 minutes of your life, and it's accessible. So
right. So I think that's a really cool idea. we're not there yet. We're trying to get to a hour and a half concert, and just kind of see what reactions we have in trying those different formats.
Go ahead.
Our concert's about an hour and 45 minutes, and we actually come into the community. We have these 38 concerts. Only 4 are at St. John's in River Oaks there. The rest of them are, at Lawndale, we do a Day of the Dead concert every year, and I think meeting people where they are, just like you said, is so important, because then you're not really grasping for their attention, you're in their life. And I think that's a part of it. I mean, our competition is a glass of wine and Netflix. Maybe not Netflix anymore, it's about to go under, but that's our competition, is people going home and saying, I'm not going back out, and just trying to find a way to, again, make them feel like there's a relationship there and it's not a ticket. We actually have a way, when you donate a certain amount of money, you actually get tickets to our concerts, so you really are an owner of the organization. We have ways you sit inside the orchestra for a piece. So I think the connection there, the deeper and wider that connection is, it's something you want to spend time with friends, and the orchestra feels like your friend, and it's part of your social life instead of something you go and add to your life. I think that's how we speak about what it is.
I think from our standpoint, it's really, there are a lot of different angles to look at this from. On the one hand, we are about to produce the beginning of the Ring cycle, and some of those operas are 5 hours long, so we're not exactly worrying too much about the attention span in the theater. And we're lucky, I guess, because opera still does have that appeal because of all of the different disciplines that it brings together, and I think when people are there, they're really engaged. But I think it does affect us in our marketing for sure. One of the things that's really interesting is how the social media allow you to bring people into the preparation process. So we have all of our tech people and some of our creative team tweeting out photos of the contraptions we're building for the Ring, and there's so much that you can do in the way of building excitement. So that on that side, it's very positive. I know we also are doing outdoor tweeting when we have outdoor performances, but I think to get back to the point of space and venue, I think it's really crucial, because when you are meeting people in a place that is familiar to them, then everything changes. The art changes, and so does the communication. And certainly with Gioco, there's no concern about all this. People do what they want to do when they're doing it. It's the traditional break between the performance space that creates the barrier, and there's value in the barrier to some degree, because people created this moment where they wanted to get away from life and be transported. And so it's figuring out where you bridge that and where you respect that. And I think the challenge is we're being called on to do both.
I'll also mention, I think, relative to the audience attention span, there's something in providing the context for active listening. If somebody doesn't have a way of connecting with the art and understanding what's behind it, then they're going to tune out a lot quicker, right? So we're looking at, what are the ways we can provide audiences with context before or during the art experiences that, again, keep their attention and then help them stay connected to the art even longer.
So the word audience, is such a broad word that there's so many different kinds of audiences. People either know a lot about the opera or they know nothing, and how do we make it accessible? So when you break the word down, audience down, what are we doing well? I mean, which are the audiences that you're like, on a metric, we're feeling good about? Which are the ones that you're scratching your head and saying, we've got to find a better way in?
I would just go back to what Glenn was talking about, the Patron Growth Initiative. One of the real purposes of that study was the fact that orchestras and certainly opera companies have done a very good job of bringing people in for the first time, but they haven't figured out how to bring them back. So I would say that that's the group that we have the most focus on, or need to focus on, in terms of understanding what is going to bring them in a way that makes them connected to the organization. And we just did a little bit of a qualitative study on our first-timers, some of them being non-traditional audiences who had come for the mariachi opera that we did a couple of years ago, and we wanted to know what would bring them back. And it was fascinating. Some of them were most concerned about what to wear. That was the biggest thing on their minds. They were nervous about coming to the opera. They weren't sure what you could wear. Others needed to know who they could come with. They were people that would like to go on their own. So there's a real opportunity for figuring out ways to have people meet up and kind of create buddies before a performance. We're thinking about something like that. So I think there are a lot of ways to look at it, but that would be the group that I'd be the most interested in.
Yeah, there's some striking statistics there that only 10% of the people who come to the organization for the first time return again within the same season. Of the 10 orchestras who were in a study of 5 years of data, I think 80% of the people in the database had only been to the symphony once. So there is a lot of trial happening with patrons, but how do you get them back the second time? Another stat, I think it's 80% of first-time subscribers decide whether they're going to renew their subscription at their first performance. So you've got a brief amount of time to engage people enough in the art to really kind of have that deeper connection. To your previous question, I think the audiences that we're doing, the best at would be obviously, people in their late 50s who are wealthy, who are Caucasian, who travel a lot, who don't have kids at home. So those are the audiences we're really reaching well, and so we all know that, and those in orchestra or opera field certainly. And so how do we reach beyond that? The audiences where we're starting to make some headway, I would say younger audiences in Houston. There seems to be a really vibrant energy within youth for the arts, especially because we have a good student music culture here. So I think everyone's kind of making some headway there, but the diversity piece is really, I think, a critical question about can we create audiences that reflect Houston's population a little bit more closely. Some would say, no, you'll never get there, focus on your target market, and others would say this is a critical question that has to be answered for arts to be more sustainable.
And we haven't talked really about music education, which is the huge black hole that smaller arts groups can just fall into and die. It's something my dad's band director, my mom's choir director, and when that gets ripped out of public schools, you have entire generations we have a parental generation who's never tactily touched an instrument, so they don't have a visceral response to seeing an orchestra or band on stage. I was a band geek. I met my husband in high school band camp, and we don't need to go there. But the point is that there's this: if you meet somebody they played French horn in high school, they just instantly connect to you. So that is something we can't do these music education programs and actually put an instrument. I mean, we can try to put an instrument in someone's hand, but then that's a whole nother pathway to go down. But until we have those public schools that have bands and orchestras. And what's also inexcusable are the fact that the private schools in town don't have band or orchestra programs in middle school. I mean, it just floors me that doesn't happen, because those are, whatever you want to talk about, are our future patrons and generation. Now we have a couple generations who've not had anything, and now they're deeply into visual art, and that's wonderful, but the performing arts of the music is not happening. So, I mean, that's something. Arts advocacy. I mean, let's talk. Put the A in STEM. Let's do the STEAM thing. Let's say hallelujah there. I mean, that's something that's got to happen too. So, there's a lot of those pieces that we could probably talk for hours on here. But it's such kind of a mission that can jerk you so far this way. But it's obviously incredibly vital. And the answers are advocacy. I know we have a panel on that too.
I would say for visual artists, the whole social media, internet world, in some ways it's a lot easier for us because we can sort of traverse it. I can throw images on Tumblr and they move around. And so I think it's also working outside of institutions, there's a lot more freedom. I don't have to, you guys have to, I'm sure, maintain a certain kind of history and dedication to the form of it, but, I can sort of abandon all of the sort of art historical references and things and go to Tumblr and just, do a different kind of work and project. So I think one of the things I think visual artists do well is exactly that. It's by going into Twitter and those other places.
So when we think about engaging and meeting people where they are, Let's talk about the question of the fine line between who's the curator. Is it the artist or is it the audience? And how do you balance that to meet everyone's goals?
Well, I think in a perfect world, it's both. It's collaboration, I think, was really the key to a truly invested audience when they can see themselves in the art or have had some participation in creating it, which, to be honest, is a real challenge for larger organizations who are used to working more top-down approach and sort of handing the art to the audience to consume rather than having a conversation about what will be meaningful for you, what can we create together. So I think the more that all the arts in Houston can start having those conversations together and collaboratively amongst themselves, will kind of create more deep engagement. What do you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, creative collaboration is the word for the day, right? And just the idea that you're engaging with other artists that can create that art, but also they have their own audiences. We tend to definitely curate from the musician's point of view, which is a completely different perspective, where the musicians talk about their pieces that they're passionate about, and the composers that are new music that's written for purposes that reflect the community we're in is super important. And because of our format, that it's not in order, I think that's where people have really consumed our new music in a way that they love it, because they don't know when that piece is coming, that piece they're dreading, that they don't know what it is, they don't know when it's coming, and when it does, then they're kind of open to it. And just keeping them on their toes, literally, I think that's important. And the creative part of that, engaging the audience in the dialogue, is so important. You're right.
So I'm going to, now you've heard them talk about what they want to achieve. I'm going to open it to you all. You're our captive audience. Give you an opportunity to say to them how you would, because you're artists or you work in organizations, but you're also arts consumers. So what would you say to colleagues up here about how you'd like to engage? If you could give them any free advice or requests. Please, yes.
I have a question about how you measure engagement. I mean, I think we have a lot of ideas, but our question moving forward is finding what are the most effective methods. So how is it, aside from butts and seats, which is what we're all looking for, how do you measure it?
There's a lot of discussion and debate around that. Certainly in the orchestra world, it's been a problem. It's also a problem in the social service world. I actually, when I was at the League, was trying to find models for this, because understanding impact and what is the effect of what you do is obviously important for all of us, as much in the fundraising side as it is in our daily activity. And there was a study done by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that said basically that the economic impacts of things, it took 20 years to develop those metrics. And we are just at the very beginning of that. So the idea that we should suddenly be able to come up with solutions to measurement overnight is unrealistic. And we all need to recognize that. That said, I think there is a choice to be made about what you set as your goal. And sometimes it is storytelling and the ability to actually understand anecdotes that represent transformation. And that's something that HGO has certainly paid attention to, is where are examples? So recently we had these community conversations after the opera, and there was a woman who had been at the Vietnamese opera, and she had been in the United States for 3 decades, and she said, I just moved to Houston, but in all my time in the United States, I've never seen my world reflected anywhere until today. Now, that is a moment of transformation. It's one person, and the decision is always, is it breadth or depth? Is it numbers or depth of engagement? And I think there were decisions made in the education world years ago, the arts education world certainly, to focus on depth and to say, if we can affect 1 or 2 people they will be talking to other people who will talk to other people. And the whole idea of influence is certainly being communicated through social media. That's how you measure that, is who are the influencers. And clearly that's the focus that the world is moving towards. So it makes sense to think that way, that if you can have an actionable impact on people, if one person chooses to give some money, or in this case the other thing that happened where there were two principals, school principals, who went to that same community conversation on a different day and said they were committed to changing public policy about young people having to spend nights in jail for truancy. So they're actually going to take action as a result of seeing this performance. So those are definite impacts that you can measure. The excellence of the performance was important to us, so we lay that out as another measurement. But I think as long as you set them up, you can then use them. There isn't any one answer, though. It's going to take a while.
Well, I think it'll look different for each organization, too.
Yeah.
But I think it's similar to the question, how do you measure a relationship? You know, it's a hard thing to quantify. But I would point us in the direction of probably loyalty, because I think they're closely related. And there are various ways, some say they're better than others, to try to get a measurement of loyalty through certain questions, metrics, assessments of your audience and how they view you. But I think it needs to be a combination of loyalty factors, amount of people reached, and how they're interacting with you and how you decide that needs to look. Some percent with online engagement, some percent maybe educational, gaining understanding of the art. So it's some combination that's probably different for everybody. But
Yeah.
Yes.
About received classical European art forms and instrumentations and pieces. One of the fascinating things to me about the Survey of Public Participation in the Arts, which the NEA is trying to change the definition, which is great, is that the year that they added attendance at salsa concerts to the survey, the participation rate in California jumped by 3 percentage points, which is about by 6%. So I think we need to broaden very much our sense of the content of what we're presenting. And I'll just remind you that when the Guggenheim in New York did an exhibit on motorcycles, which was, by the way, panned by the critics, I don't know why, the MoMA has a whole floor on industrial design now, that for the first time and only time ever, people lined up for blocks and blocks in motorcycle jackets to see this exhibit. And another example is that when the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, in their lab theater, put on a performance of Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dime, which was about a woman working as a hotel cleaner in a Walmart and in a fast food place. Again, it was packed full. They kept running, extending the run. They never had a show like that with that kind of attendance. And I know it's a challenge at different forums, but I also just want to say that I haven't heard one person speak to what we teach in universities as, music, art, and performance. And that is a huge part of the problem, because look how many years it took for jazz to become an acceptable thing to teach in university programs. So if we really want to be more inclusive by class and diversity, we have to really dig a lot deeper.
well, I think it's fascinating, the widening the perspective on what is arts, and there's a lot of consumption happening. There's a lot of engagement happening across many art forms, and also a lot of different channels. And I think from my perspective at my organization, figuring out how to connect and dip into those different types of art that there's a lot of kind of cultural relevance around, connecting something that's a traditional European art with something that's very American, or something that's international in another way, or something that's just really different, kind of helps challenge the art, but also bring in a whole different set of people. So
I think it's interesting. Your comment reminded me a lot. I worked in the museum sector a large part of my career in Washington, D.C., and when you work on the sort of the business side of it, you can constantly have those conversations with the curators about what's going to bring audience in and the academic piece of it, and how to find the happy medium there. Often the blockbuster shows are not the ones that the curators love as much. And so it's an interesting dialogue. And I mean, to your point about the New World Symphony, it's all about an entry point. All organizations, all artists have there's different entry points. Not everybody comes to the traditional route and comes with a lot of knowledge. And when you're referring to New World Symphony, one of the ways that they're engaging younger people is by something they call Pulse, which starts at 11:30 p.m. and it's coming to the symphony in a club atmosphere. And since they've done 3 of them and they've brought in over 1,000 people each time, these are not, 80% of them are not people who've ever attended a traditional symphony concert in their lives. So, you know, it was shaking it up and looking at how do we take traditional art forms and making people approach them differently.
But are they going to cross over and actually come to the traditional concert? I mean, that's another part of it too. And it's fine to have different audiences for different concerts. The things that happen with Rocco, I mean, we're 9 years old to almost 10, and we did 38 concerts, and not, you know, a lot of them chamber, but it's all personal. It's all based on a relationship. It's me loving Dia de los Muertos and then finding Lawndale, and it's all very personal. So those things stem from that, from our perspective. You know, we have an issue. I mean, as far as the name, River Oaks Chamber Orchestra, it's Rocco. You know, we're not snooty. I'm not. But just the idea of everyone's name, MF. I mean, here we are, Rocco, River Oaks, and MF, and it's awesome. We're sitting right here and talking, and we both love Yoda. So, I mean, that's what's great to me about art, just the personal connection. So I totally hear what you're saying, and I think it can be important. I was a part of an orchestra here a long time ago that did play in bars, and I played at Infernal Bridegroom. And we showed up to a rehearsal, and the dead body was being hauled away behind the thing, you know. But I'm just saying that once we were there, people were smoking and talking and drinking, and I really didn't have to play on my best reed for that concert because they didn't hear me and they weren't present. And so it's finding that fine line, because I've been through 3 different orchestras here, and I've been lived in Europe and just seeing all the different ways people engage. It's that fine line to finding the presence with an audience and with the person you're connecting with, whether it's 1 or 1,000, or just entertaining them. And I'm totally into entertaining, you can tell that, and it's great. But there has to be that fine line, and I think we all struggle with that and know that it's important. Also, real quick, just to the point about how changing the way you measure can really make the picture different. If you stop looking at, you know, you can hear a lot of doom and gloom stats about consumption of performing arts in America and orchestral music, but if you look at how many people are engaging with that sort of music, you know, online on the one-to-one basis through technology, new technologies, there actually is an increasing amount of engagement in music. It's just people are consuming it in a different way. So the stats become different when you take all that into account.
And I just want to respond to that as well. I think the question you're asking is almost an impossible question. Like it's not really an art question. Like it's sort of a political question. Like whose voice is going to be represented. And excuse me, I'm sorry. And so I think those things happen slowly and over time. Like for me, I'm all for like a complete upending of like, you know, the social kind of fabric where everybody can participate and you know. But I think it's really difficult to I don't know. I don't want to be a defeatist, but I don't see it happening where all levels of class and diversity will be represented in every art form. I mean, it's one of the reasons I kind of, you know, I show in a gallery and I realize a gallery is like a very limited place. Even me showing there, like there's only so much I can do there, and so I have to go outside of it. But I think that's what I was implying by like, you know, a place like the orchestra or the symphony. I don't know how much you can change it and retain itself. But I think the problem comes in is assuming that itself is universal. Right. And I think that might be the problem.
But I think all organizations are having that self-identity crisis of we want to be everything to everybody.
Right.
And so at what point do you lose who you are?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment?
We're having a great conversation. I was actually going to take it back a step to you, Robert, and ask about the museum and the local artist and how you were able to bring that together. And in that classroom that you set up, who was the audience?
So that's the Manil project. like I said, that was a project I did with Oda Binga Jones and Associates, my longest collaborative, and we've done, like, that's a very particular kind of group. So we've had success in, like, the traditional art world. We've shown in, big shows and that kind of thing, but we're also local enough and do enough sort of, I don't know, intervention-based problematic things to where we still have kind of, an audience that will go with us into those museums and not discount the things that we say. So we were able to just kind of get the opportunity to work with the Manil collection and bring our audience to that. I don't know if I think I'm answering. I'm not sure if I'm. How did it happen? We were invited to. So the Manil does a series of exhibitions. Well, they've done a few of these exhibitions where they invite an artist to come into the museum and work with their archive. And it's the kind of thing that happens a lot now. I think at the time there were only like a few artists. Fred Wilson, I think David McGee had actually done it at the Manil. But artists going into the museum, looking at all the materials that they have. It's one of the ways they kind of look at, I think it's one of the ways museums can approach diversity. So you have all this material you've collected over 100 years, considering, depending on what museum it is. Well, who's defining what that material is? And one way to do that is by inviting an alternative voice in. And so that's what they did with us. They invited us to come in, look at their collection, and create an exhibition. But we're the ones who sort of, like, that form of exhibition doesn't really operate for us. So we were like, well, they got all this stuff that we want people to see, but we also need to give it context. And so which is why we created the classroom. And the Manil is sort of very, very well known for not being kind of a pedagogical place like that. They present their work, very little information, so that you can, like, come experience the artwork in its kind of true self without a lot of, voices in your head. But we kind of didn't want to approach it that way, so.
I actually wanted to go back to something that Glenn brought up, this idea of how art is being consumed. And I'm hoping that everyone on the panel will be able to address this. How are in your particular field, are you tapping into the trends of artistic consumption? And if you could speak specifically to how technological innovations are affecting and influencing your ability to create authentic partnerships within community.
One of the things that we launched this last year is we live stream our concerts into patients' rooms at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And now we're video on demanding it with Methodist and other hospitals and nursing homes. I do feel like sometimes in classical music we have age discrimination because we do say, we all love our patrons that are older too, but that's one of the ways. And we've done obviously the texting things and the texting ideas and in our classroom and in our concerts, but we also have things like online. You can hear all of our past concerts for the past 9 years, just trying to find a way to bring people into the actual product of what we do instead of having to be in the Foursquare concert hall.
Yeah, we're, the whole orchestra industry is grappling with this because, to be honest, we're really behind. And it's like trying to drag the 800-pound gorilla into the 21st century because of the just kind of entrenched structure. And you've got the, artist union piece that's involved. And so there are changes happening, and it's interesting. There are some orchestras who are really, talk about wildcatting, really sort of going out there, especially a couple of the orchestras who have, to be honest, been close to dissolving or been close to bankruptcy and have had to kind of rebuild from the ground up, and then they've had the opportunity to really make some big changes. Detroit Symphony, for instance, is really putting themselves out there as the most, the leader in the digital media field. They are webcasting all of their, I don't know if it's all of their, but many of their concerts, and have had, I think, 500,000 views at this point from all of their webcasts. I think it's really, we have no choice. We've got to get there with more on-demand streaming, webcasting. So we are kind of dipping our toe in the water and pushing the envelope in Houston, but it feels like we're trying to catch up. We have done mobile engagement with patrons, similar to what Alicia is probably talking about, people texting in Q&As, vote for your favorite encore, and those have worked well, especially for some of our more casual summer concerts or concerts reaching younger audiences. And we do have a mobile application. And also, in terms of technology, in a different sense, into the performance, we're doing a lot with film and integrating film together with music. And that's bringing in a whole kind of different sector, and especially relative to kind of popular, like we just announced that we're going to do the 2 Star Trek, the new J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies this summer. Full movies shown on a screen, and the orchestra play the soundtrack live. So the whole film cinematic element has been really an exciting frontier for us to go in.
And you're right, and it is expensive. I mean, then we'll get back to our patron, you know. I mean, it is expensive to pay the limited pressing that you pay, or the broadcast fees, or the licensing. I mean, it's super expensive to do that. So then you have to circle it back to the patron who's interested in consuming the art that direction, and finding the sponsors for that, so.
I would just say that the opera is subject to the same issues and challenges that the orchestra world is. And I would say that Gioco has really focused more on reaching people individually and trying to put their energy into the community of Houston and reaching people through a lot of different relationships. And they've just done an enormous amount of partnering, and it's making a difference. So it's a different approach. It's not what everybody else is doing, but I would say the other area that is very promising is in education. And for this ring that we're doing, we are in an experiment with a school around gaming and helping young people create games based on the themes of the ring. And it's a 4-year program that starts with 9th graders and goes all the way through seniors. And the teacher and the students will teach the next class up what they've learned, but it's based on the themes of the ring. So I think there are ways to be creative and to do it in using technology, but perhaps not for us yet as direct as being able to offer the product in unadulterated form.
Well, the other interesting debate that happens there within the organization is, a performance of a symphony on your screen at home when you're on your couch in your pajamas is really attractive to a certain group of people, and that's great. And I, as a marketing person, want to attract those people. And there's some people who never want to give up the live experience. And then there's some people in the middle that you could argue about, are you affecting negatively by going to something more digital? At what point does the art become dumbed down and not that visceral live experience? And so there's kind of probably some purists who would kind of push back on the consumption in different ways. But I think ultimately we've got to get it out there in as many ways as possible and reach the broadest group.
I have an anecdote about that, though. We have been, like I said, live streaming the concerts. And so we have this nursing home who used to bring, 2, maybe 1.5 rows of people to the concert. Well, we'll do a live shout-out during Take 5 and wave to these nursing homes. Well, we get more people coming to the live because the people that are back in their wheelchairs and couldn't quite get there are watching their friends on TV. So they're super excited. They actually came to the concert and were still mobile enough to get there. So actually, it created more tickets for us and the live experience. So it was just, I don't know, what is it? Access makes the heart grow fonder. Somebody I know out there says a lot. Terry?
We've heard about a lot of really exciting engagement strategies, reaching diverse audiences, et cetera. We are, however, with Houston's economy being as healthy as it is, seeing like an incredible amount of growth and sort of a changing face of the Houston community. Do you have any specific tools that you're using to engage those people new to Houston? Anything specific?
Well, in our case, it is directly going to them and getting their stories. I mean, that's the simple solution, is that we've worked with community leaders and identified communities, and we're looking now, for example, going forward at the veterans community. So we're broadening our definition of what a community is and saying who have certain kinds of common interests and connections that bind them, and what can we do with them that speaks to them. So it's literally going to them and talking. That's our first step, and things come from that. We don't really go with any expectations of outcomes. So.
I think what you mentioned is a huge opportunity. I think it ultimately comes down to probably partnering with organizations, somehow creating relationships where you interact with new movers. You know, there's kind of the shotgun marketing approaches that we've tried of, you know, getting coupons into new mover packets or getting special offers out to companies that are moving their employees to Houston. And those are all tactical things that, you know, can be somewhat effective, but I think the question, I mean, it's still, the jury's still out on how do you kind of create a meaningful first interaction. One thing actually that has worked really well is we do send out trial cards to the direct mail cards to audiences that have never come to the symphony before, kind of as a free trial offer. Come and try the symphony if you've never been before, and then, you know, get those people into the pipeline to try the experience and then try to engage them further. And so we'll, you know, I mean, this is a very kind of core marketing direct mail thing, but it just mentioned it as something that is concrete, that has worked. We'll send out 100,000 cards to people in certain areas of Houston and say, you know, come down to the symphony and try it, and it kind of directly gets people in the door to start the relationship.
And we're still in the well of balsam stage of you tell two friends and tell two friends and so on and so on. That's kind of where we are, because we can't afford that kind of marketing. But I mean, I'm still up for doing a plane on the sky. It would get a lot of people to see. So maybe we could all go together. But yeah, I think it's hard to find the new people, right? Everybody's in a way new to Houston, and I think I wish Space Secret Fresh Arts does such a great job of marketing the small and mid-sized groups for ourselves, because we can't get out there on the mountaintop like I want to and do it. How about you?
I'm actually just now starting to think about that new population. When the mural I showed, like the people who were living around Lawndale, it's, you know, it's a lot of those sort of new condos and things. And so for me, it was the first time actually engaging with what I assume is that audience, particularly in a way that, you know, I didn't have this sort of chip on my shoulder about gentrification, you know, like, who are you moving in my neighborhood? But I'm actually much more curious as to, like, and like I said, I'm still trying to figure this thing out. Like, how do you start to diagram who these people are, where they're coming from, what they're bringing to the city? I mean, right now I just see a lot more traffic and that kind of thing, but like, and maybe somebody out here does know, like, how do you figure out what are the numbers and who are these people, and how do you start to engage them specifically, not just, you know, as a group of new people to Houston deal with mosquitoes, you know, like, who are they actually?
Robert, you said whose voice will be represented earlier, and that interests me. Actually, I was thinking about Gioco, and I love the short, they're mainly 30-minute operas that come out of different ethnic communities here and are based on personal, authentic life stories. And what I'm wondering is those people who get involved in those community, specific community operas and become audiences for them, do they come back to HGO, and do they become, you know, regular audience members, and are they brought into the you know, the whole group, or were they just interested in their group? And what my real question is, are we trying to get people, like, opera is mainly by Europeans for Europeans. There are some exceptions, but the main rep is, you know, largely that. And so are we trying to, I know you have other purposes also, but are we trying to bring people who are in newer ethnic communities here in Houston into the fold and win them over and say, yes, that was about your community, but now come look at ours, you're going to like ours too? Or do you think we're moving towards having a different standard rep that is more representative of like Houston?
Well, it's a really great question, and I think the answer is yes to both, because obviously we don't do these things. The programs are not initiated to build an audience in the regular house. We just don't think of it that way because it's not practical. On the other hand, we do have a number of people who have come over to us and come more often than just the one performance that was geared to their community. There is a lot of interest in the community operas as a set. So, whether it's one ethnic community or another, they might come to hear what the other community's opera is. But I think the bottom line is we don't see it as a way of building our own audience in a traditional way. And that is a luxury that we have in a lot of ways, because I think what we see is that it has a lot more to do with the philanthropic side of our organization. And the fact is that only 30% of our income comes from ticket sales. 70% is from philanthropy. And what we know is that our donors value the importance of reaching a more diverse audience and reaching Houston. So what we're doing is bringing in much more on the philanthropic side as a result of this work. And I think that's an important perspective that people need to have. Is tickets are only one piece of it. And as Alicia's organization is almost all investor supported, as she will say.
Yeah, with hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah, tickets are kind of a secondary consideration for her. I think that's something to think about.
And I think that's a good reminder that engagement, there's so many ways one can engage. And it's I think a good wrap up is a call to action to all of us to be engaged, right? No matter whether we work and we get a paycheck for doing so, or whether we practice an art form, or whether we support them philanthropically, we are all necessary to engagement in all those forms. And, and I think if we take needing to engage and turning into engaging, it doesn't become a project in our organizations or as artists, it becomes a culture of what we do. I think that's when we start to see even more success. So this has been a great discussion. Thank you all for engaging with us, and here's to lots of success in our Houston community. And thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Sure.